Luo Chong's industrial machine roared into overdrive. Fueled by patriotic fervor and a truly biblical amount of pork stew, his factories birthed a fleet of 21 steam-powered tractors. This steel dragon convoy then stunned the regional prefects, conquering a vast wasteland in a display of raw mechanical might that promised an end to famine forever. But while Boss Luo was busy revolutionizing agriculture and planning scientific pig castration for fatter bacon, his agent Yu Fu was conducting a different kind of conquest. With gifts of advanced sheep, the miracle of the iron plow, and the dazzling allure of money, he began the soft assimilation of the primitive Baiwu tribe. He masterfully dismantled their old world, not with swords, but with wages, creating a need only the Han could fill. As the first wave of eager Baiwu laborers marched off to their new jobs, 30,000 captured slaves arrived from the north. They weren't offered a better life. They were assigned to the most dangerous mines and tunnels, raw materials for an empire that seduces its friends and consumes its enemies. Once this batch of material was worked to the point of obsolescence and naturally phased out, the chapter on captives would be closed. The nature of their society would only truly change when every household had private slaves of their own. The current situation was, at most, centralized management, a world away from a true slave society. Besides, with the clang and clatter of industrialization progressing throughout the tribe and all sorts of mechanical power becoming widespread, who would still want to use two-legged captives? The efficiency was abysmal. Of course, if one wanted servants in the future, it wasn't impossible. You could simply hire them. That was an employment relationship, just like nannies and hourly workers in later eras. It was a respectable relationship between an employer and an employee, bound by a signed contract, not sealed by the thumbprint of indentured servitude. The nature was different. The distinction was enormous. With the female captives properly arranged, Luo Chong turned his attention to an even bigger headache. More than 10,000 mouths, all clamoring to be fed. And they were all adolescents. Each one ate like a reincarnated starving ghost, with an appetite that could devour a granary and enough energy to punch a hole in the sky. Managing them was a monumental task. Luo Chong stroked his chin, pondering. He couldn't just let this pack of young hellions live off the tribe's charity, could he? Sit around until they ate through a mountain of supplies? The Han tribe's grain didn't just blow in on the wind. Putting all else aside, at the very least, they had to learn to support themselves. The tribe was short-staffed everywhere, especially when it came to skilled workers. Those were as precious as gems. And weren't these 10,000-plus adolescents right at the golden age for learning? Luo Chong's eyes darted, and a plan formed in his mind. He would organize them all into a military-style unit. What to call it? The Engineer Corps? The Railway Corps? The name wasn't important. What mattered was that it would be a special unit capable of both labor and infrastructure construction. A force of 10,000. In a more modern era, that was half a division. This bunch of young thorns was wild and untamable. He had to find a group of hardened veterans to keep them in line. Luo Chong mulled it over, and his gaze fell upon the Eagle Guard stationed in Chaoyang Prefecture on Cheongzhou Island. Chaoyang Prefecture was the territory of the Yu clan. This group of fishermen had surrendered voluntarily, and with the tribe's current support policies for their trade being overwhelmingly generous, their loyalty was absolute. They wouldn't dare rebel even if you gave them the nerve. Leaving an army, there was a complete waste of resources. It was better to transfer them back, where they could be put to good use. The Eagle Guard wasn't large, only about 2,000 professional soldiers at full strength. Their strategic impact was limited, making them perfect for this new role. Using 2,000 grizzled veterans, tempered on the battlefield, to discipline 10,000 raw recruits. Now that was a bargain. On average, one veteran would lead 5 new boys. In a flash, every veteran would become a deputy squad leader. Management would be a piece of cake. Of course, there was no rush to teach them how to build railways just yet. For now, there were only 2 urgent objectives: farm the land and get an education. The management policy would be simple and brutal, pure militarization. Their daily routine would consist of standing at attention and marching in formation. They weren't training to kill, but to achieve absolute obedience and discipline. They also had to master the Han language, or they wouldn't even understand the commands to eat. The rest of their time would be spent reclaiming wasteland, planting crops, raising pigs, and herding cattle. You want to eat? Go grow it yourself. After a year or 2 of this regimen, once their wildness had been ground down and they spoke the Han language fluently, he would reorganize them into a professional engineering corps. They would be dedicated to building bridges and paving roads for the Han tribe, spreading a network of railways across the land. As for the location for their agricultural work, Luo Chong had already planned it out. The capital, and the two new cities, Chungkong Prefecture and Xi'an Prefecture. These three locations were all designated for major future development, and large populations would be migrating there sooner or later. Instead of letting the new settlers break their backs clearing the wilderness, it was better to have this group of young captives turn the raw land into fertile fields first. When the citizens arrived in a couple of years, they could start planting immediately. It was a perfect plan. With the order given, the more than 10,000 adolescent captives were immediately packaged up and diverted. The capital had the heaviest task, receiving 6,000 boys, who would be militarily trained by 1,200 veterans from the Eagle Guard. Xi'an Prefecture had help from the Baiwu tribe and wasn't short on manpower, so the remaining 4,000 were all sent to Chungkong Prefecture. These 4,000 were to be supervised by 800 Eagle Guard soldiers. Their mission was to reclaim wasteland, farm, and raise chickens and ducks. Firstly, to solve their own food supply, and secondly, to improve the diet of their big brothers working at the nearby construction sites by sending over fresh vegetables and meat, just as the Baiwu tribe was doing in Xi'an. Besides, with a large number of workers permanently stationed in Chungkong Prefecture, these 4,000 little captives couldn't stir up any trouble even if they sprouted wings. How to handle these young troublemakers? The carrot and the stick, a timeless method. Every day at sunset, a commendation meeting would be held. The top 100 performers would get extra food for dinner, big chunks of meat. The bottom 100? They would get acquainted with the military baton and forget about dinner. Anyone defiant? Want to be the nail that sticks out? Your head would serve as the perfect tool to establish authority. With this method, in less than half a month, they would all be utterly obedient. If you told them to go east, they wouldn't dare glance west. Since ancient times, there have only been a few tricks to training soldiers. They were simple, but they were effective, especially in an era where corporal punishment was rampant and no one cared about human rights. Violate a military order? Off with your head. Try that in the modern era, and the most you'd get is solitary confinement and a written self-criticism. Dare to lay a single finger on a soldier? Unthinkable. The great army of captives transported from the north did not linger long in Weishan Prefecture. Like parcels, they were quickly sorted and dispatched to their respective destinations. The 5,000 able-bodied men sent to Xing'an Prefecture had it the easiest. They disembarked at the docks, transferred directly onto a clanging train, and were whisked away to the mines in a puff of smoke. The more than 6,000 women were taken by a fleet of ships to an isolated island in the middle of a lake. Mountains of supplies followed, waiting only for the white-coated personnel from the medical college to arrive for screening and for Xiao Dai's clothing factory to begin operations. The remaining old men and the 10,000-plus adolescents continued south on the flying fish clippers, either heading directly to construction sites or being sent to the untamed wilderness to begin their new lives of farming and guarding the frontier. The southbound ships docked at Weishan Prefecture for rest and resupply. Imagine it. Tens of thousands of people eating, drinking, and relieving themselves on board for over a month. The stench in the cabins was on the level of a biochemical weapon, enough to make one's eyes roll back into their head. The ships needed a thorough scrubbing. Moreover, there would be no more large-scale captive transport south in the future, nor would there be a desperate need to ship northern grain southward. Therefore, many of the ships that had made this southern journey would not need to return. It was during this brief period of rest that the northern militiamen who had escorted the captives had their minds completely blown. They, who had nominally been part of the Han tribe for several years, had never seen its true face. The escort mission had been an agonizing month at sea, but the thought of finally seeing the legendary Celestial Empire with their own eyes made the hardship worthwhile. On the night before reaching Weishan Prefecture, the fleet was still navigating the dark river. A month of drifting had not only left the captives spiritually drained, but had also made the militiamen on board irritable and restless. They had traveled south all this way, seeing nothing but wilderness on both banks, not even a wisp of civilization. Many had begun to wonder, this Han tribe we've joined, it isn't just some mythical kingdom from the legends, is it? Does this place even exist? Just as doubt was creeping into everyone's mind, on the verge of an existential crisis, swoosh. A beam of light, like a colossal pillar holding up the heavens, suddenly tore through the pitch-black night, sweeping over the tops of their sails. The light was 100 times more dazzling than the moon in the sky. Everyone on board was stunned into silence by the sudden spectacle, their mouths agape, forgetting to breathe. My heavens! What is that? It was the light from the Morning Star lighthouse at the Weishan Prefecture docks, a miraculous beam that could illuminate the river for 50 li. Voiceover. When it comes to reforming unruly youths, Luo Chong is a master of militarized management plus KPI assessment, paired with a last-place elimination system, a veritable training manual for the primitive king of the grind. As long as your thinking doesn't slip, there are always more solutions than problems. Never mind 10,000 adolescents. Even 100,000 would be managed into perfect, docile obedience. That dazzling white column of light, like a divine staff stirring the night sky, swept mercilessly over the fleet, once and then again. The militiamen on the ships were instantly transfixed by the bizarre sight, craning their necks, mouths agape enough to fit an egg. What in the blazes is that? In the middle of the night. Is this place haunted? Just as their souls were about to flee their bodies, an experienced old sailor slapped his thigh, pointed to the source of the distant light, and roared at the top of his lungs. It's the Morning Star Lighthouse. Our Han tribe's lighthouse. We're almost at Weishan Prefecture. That shout was like a ladle of cold water thrown into a wok of boiling oil. Boom. The deck erupted in an instant. Militiamen who had been lying in their cabins like corpses heard the commotion and came scrambling out, clinging to the ship's rails, staring intently at the white beam of light rotating at a constant speed in the night sky. This miraculous, powerful light, in their worldview, was absolutely not something mortals could create. We've arrived at the Han tribe? Is that a Han tribe prefecture capital up ahead? I wonder how big it is. Do the people there look like us? Their lives must be better than ours, right? What in the world is that light? Why is it spinning in circles? Did our tribe's people really make that? How much farther? We can see the light, so it can't be far, right? Good heavens, we've been on this ship for nearly 40 days. My bones are about to fall apart. The deck instantly turned into a chaotic marketplace, the cacophony of chatter drawing the captain's attention. Standing on the high stern castle, the captain cleared his throat, looking for all the world like a professional tour guide, and shouted down to the crowd of tourists who had never seen such a sight. Comrades, quiet. Ahead of us is our Han tribe's Weishan Prefecture. Those two spinning beams of light are coming from the Morning Star Lighthouse at the docks. They're specifically to guide our ships navigating at night. Seeing it means we've entered the busiest inland waterway. By dawn tomorrow, you'll all be able to go ashore and get a proper rest. The captain paused, then added, Weishan Prefecture is our tribe's major agricultural prefecture, with a permanent population of 40 to 50,000. It's also the largest water and land transportation hub in the inland. Last year's northern expedition by the Divine Strategy Guard set off from here. One last reminder. Don't let your guard down when we arrive. Keep a close watch on the captives, and don't let them cause trouble where there are crowds. Just one final push. And surprisingly, the captain's pre-shift training was remarkably effective. At least, when the fleet approached the docks and the militiamen could see the towering lighthouse with their own eyes, not a single one was foolish enough to drop to their knees and kowtow, shouting nonsense like a miracle from the gods. Awe was one thing, but they now had a baseline understanding. Oh, so it's man-made. It was just a supersized carbide lamp. They had them on their ships too, just miniature versions. My God, the craftsmen of the Han tribe are incredible. They can build a lamp as big as a mountain. This, most likely, was the truest thought running through their minds. Though it was the dead of night, the docks of Weishan Prefecture were a hive of activity. Along the shore, rows of tower cranes, like giant steel beasts, swung their long arms, precisely suspending baskets full of coke over train cars. With a whoosh, a black torrent poured down. The adjacent cranes weren't idle either. Steel rails, rebar, ingots, countless construction materials were hoisted and transported away. The entire dock was like a ceaselessly beating iron heart, pumping blood to the entire tribe. All the berths were occupied. The fleet could only drop anchor temporarily in the middle of the river and send a small boat to exchange passwords with the port authority, incidentally reporting the arrival of a large shipment of captives. As for the militiamen on the ships, they were suddenly in no hurry to go ashore. Like a gaggle of country bumpkins gawking at a metropolis for the first time, they clung to the ship's rails, completely blinded by the glittering, sleepless city before them. It was clearly the middle of the night, yet the docks were as bright as day. Countless lights illuminated every inch of the ground. Countless laborers and sailors scurried about like industrious ants. A few official-looking scribes, wearing black cloth hats, held ledgers and yelled themselves hoarse verifying cargo quantities. On the shore, a steaming, bustling area drew everyone's gaze. It was the food court. Steamed buns, baozi, sesame flatbreads, griddle cakes, fried rice, noodles. The aroma wafted across the distance and drilled right into their nostrils. There were also zongzi, roasted meats, rice cakes, and even stir-fry dishes cooked to order. In the adjacent market, fresh fruits and vegetables glistened with dew. Newly butchered pigs and sheep still had a sheen to them. Live fish and shrimp thrashed vigorously in basins of water. My heavens, this place was paradise. Many laborers just getting off their shifts were shooting the breeze in groups of 3 or 5 over a plate of snacks and a pot of white wine. Sailors who had just docked were stuffing their faces, replenishing their energy and shaking off the fatigue of their voyage. The city proper was under curfew, a dead silence. The docks outside the city, however, were ablaze with lights and roaring with the sound of 1,000 voices. The city, the docks, the ships, they seemed like 3 completely different worlds. Looking at the scene on the shore, these militiamen from the north felt a pang of inadequacy. They looked down at their own filthy, tattered clothes, then at the spirited people on the shore, and inexplicably felt a head shorter. We're all citizens of the Han tribe, so how come we feel like beggars? Fortunately, this feeling of inadequacy didn't last long before a piece of wonderful news arrived. They could go ashore in batches. Their movement would be restricted, but all food and drink expenses would be covered by the public purse. For these men who hadn't seen a drop of grease in over a month, the words, publicly reimbursed, were music to their ears. Just as the sky began to lighten, the order came to transfer the captives. 5,000 captives were escorted directly to the train station. When the militiamen saw the Iron Dragon, their eyes nearly popped out of their sockets. The captives were packed into the carriages like sardines in a tin. With a long, mournful W.O., the train hissed white steam and thundered away, vanishing in a cloud of dust. Mother of mine, that thing, it hauls more cargo than one of our ships. Witnessing the terrifying transport capacity of the train, the militiamen's reverence for the Han tribe rose to a new level. No wonder they could build such incredible firearms. Compared to this beast, a firearm was just a small toy. With the captives sent off, the militiamen were finally free. Prefecture Governor Lu Guangzhou specially assigned a few junior officials to act as their guides. When they passed the food court at the docks, the entire group froze, craning their necks, saliva streaming down like waterfalls, their eyes glued to the food. They couldn't help but grumble inwardly. The tribe is so stingy. Can't they just let us eat one meal here? Just as their resentment was brewing, the leading official suddenly shouted, "Comrades from the north, I know you're hungry. The prefecture governor has already prepared a feast at the official guest house, guaranteed to be even better than this. Follow me." Upon hearing this, the men's faces lit up. With a new spring in their step, they headed straight for the guest house. Sure enough, the meal prepared at the guest house was in no way inferior. Steaming hot pot, sizzling skewers of grilled meat, and all-you-can-eat noodles and flatbreads. Though they were all simple, quick dishes, to these starving men, it was a taste of heaven. But they weren't done after eating their fill. They were then led as a group to a steamy, vaporous place, a bathhouse. This was a newfangled thing, a large-scale bathing center made possible by steam engines and water pumps. Treating us to a meal is one thing, but a group bath? What's this all about? Some found the water too hot and hesitated to step in. They were promptly kicked in by their comrades, letting out an initial yelp of pain that quickly turned into a groan of pure, soul-deep pleasure. Oh damn, that feels good. They had never felt so comfortable in their entire lives. After their bath, the thoroughly relaxed militiamen were led back to the guest house to sleep. Although it was a large common room, the bedding was clean and the heated Kong beds were toasty warm. Eating, bathing, sleeping. This all-inclusive, considerate service finally made these militiamen from afar feel at home. So, the tribe didn't look down on us poor relatives from the north after all. The subsequent transfer of captives proceeded in an orderly fashion. The female captives never even disembarked but were sent directly to the island in the lake. The young men and adolescents transferred to faster-flying fish boats to continue their journey south. The 2,000 or so old men were the easiest to handle. They were simply loaded onto a cargo ship carrying rebar, which happened to be going to the same destination, and gave them a lift. At this point, all the militiamen were free. They enjoyed a rare vacation in Weishan Prefecture while waiting for the ships to be cleaned and reloaded with cargo for the return journey. This time, the ships returning north would not be filled with grain, but with all kinds of machinery, tools, and an official appointment from Luo Chong. He was to formally establish the Han tribe's northern sphere of influence as a new prefecture, Heyuan Prefecture. The prefecture would have 3 counties under its jurisdiction, upgraded from the hunting grounds, salt pans, and river valley camps. The prefectural seat would be established at the more conveniently located salt pans camp. Give a man a fish, and you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, and you feed him for a lifetime. Since he had decided to formally incorporate that land into his territory, he had to treat it equally and provide strong support. Voiceover. From the culture shock triggered by a lighthouse to the all-inclusive service of eat, wash, sleep, the Han tribe's soft power was off the charts. This wasn't just receiving comrades from the north. This was a meticulously planned corporate culture seminar. The theme was, see? Stick with me, and you'll eat well. This move was more effective at winning hearts and minds than any grandiloquent speech. Though Luo Chong had never been to the north, as a modern man accustomed to viewing satellite maps, a few glances at the simple charcoal sketches sent back by Chu Bing and Yu Yi were all he needed to analyze the region's strategic points with unerring precision. The river valley camped to the west. It boasted a large population and ample arable land, but the terrain was a bottleneck, like the mouth of a gourd. Tucked away in a valley, it offered limited room for expansion. Pass. The hunting grounds to the east? A basin set amidst rolling hills, flanked by mountains to the south and forests to the north. Just constructing a road through it would kill half the workforce. Pass. Luo Chong's fingertip tapped the center of the map. The Salt Pans region. Bingo. The terrain here was open, allowing for any future expansion he desired. It was easily accessible and possessed a key economic asset, a nearby salt mine. It was a capital practically sent from the heavens. With the prefecture's name and capital decided, who should be its first governor? Luo Chong barely hesitated before a name popped into his head. Yi. The tens of thousands of people in this new Heyuan prefecture had all been swindled. Ah, no, coaxed over by Yu Yi, one village and one stockade at a time. He had earned it through sheer toil, if not outright merit. To upgrade the temporary camps into an official prefecture and then immediately kick the man to the curb? That was just bad form. Besides, sending a new person would be like sending them in blind. How long would it take for them to get a handle on the situation? It was better to let Yu Yi, the local boss, continue for now. After 3 or 4 years, once the prefecture's basic infrastructure was established, he could issue a transfer order under the glorious pretext of a promotion, moving him back to the capital to enjoy his retirement. A promotion in name, but in reality, a way to sideline him. After all, Heyuan Prefecture was a place where heaven was high and the emperor was far away. Yu Yi was the de facto king. Luo Chong wasn't worried about his loyalty, but what if some fool started whispering in his ear? It was always better to be safe than sorry. With the decision made, the accompanying newbie starter pack had to follow. According to reports, Heyuan Prefecture was dirt poor. Aside from a copper mine and an asphalt lake, you couldn't find a single speck of iron. That simply wouldn't do. With a flourish of his pen, Luo Chong first dispatched 2 full ships of gleaming, cast steel ingots. How to use them? He'd let the local blacksmiths figure that out. Next, a dozen of the latest Iron Horse Mark III steam engines. Air compressors, water pumps, all sorts of rat-a-tat-tat pneumatic tools. They'd power them all. There was also a brand new corn thresher and a steam-powered flour mill. These were invaluable assets. The tribe's recent inventions, like the platform scale that could weigh an elephant and the precision mechanical clock, were all arranged for shipment. Oh, right, and the newly mass-produced hand-cranked rice transplanters, 100 of those to start, plus a complimentary 10,000 sets of core components, gears and chains. With a sample and the parts, they could build their own in the future. Give a man a fish, and you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, and you feed him for a lifetime. Luo Chong wasn't worried about the war in the north in the slightest. Please. What Chu Bing held in his hands was the most powerful firearm-equipped army on the planet. Fighting a bunch of cannibals still playing with mud? It was a beatdown from a higher dimension. Losing was impossible. The only question was whether they'd be grinding their opponents into the dirt a day sooner or a day later. The dividends of war had already been delivered to his doorstep. 30,000 captives were distributed throughout the lands. 10,000 adolescents were waging their own war against the wilderness, reclaiming wasteland across the central and southern plains. The women's prison on the Lake Island was officially open for business, with lines of female captives awaiting health checkups from the white-coated staff of the medical college. And in Xinfeng Prefecture, the arrival of 5,000 able-bodied captives directly liberated the Han tribe citizens from the mines. These men walked out of the pitch-black mine shafts, washed the cold dust from their faces, and turned right around to enter the much brighter steel mills, foundries, and cement plants. Among the master craftsmen in the factories, some were promoted on the spot, their salaries doubled, specifically to train apprentices. Another group, the quicker-witted and more dexterous ones, were packaged and sent to various machinery manufacturing plants and research institutes to pursue their master's degrees. building up a talent reserve for future industrial upgrades. The most obvious change from this wave of talent optimization was that the research institutes were finally no longer short-staffed. The researchers who had previously been pulled away to serve as technical advisors could now return to their real jobs and dive headfirst into developing new projects. And with more people, the efficiency, it was like it was strapped to a rocket. Whoosh. The corn harvester, which had been stuck in development for ages, was officially finalized in the second month of the new year. The order wasn't large. Besides the prototype, a total of only 5 were needed. The Research Institute churned out that kind of production in half a month. A week later, the grain harvester also passed its inspection. But Luo Chong didn't have it put into production immediately. Instead, with a wave of his hand, he lent this precious piece of machinery to the Ministry of Agriculture. Take it. When the wheat is ripe this summer, give it a trial run in the fields. Let me know if it's any good. Give it a 5-star review. And while you're at it, write an 800-word user feedback report. In any case, the tribe didn't have many wheat fields suitable for machine cultivation. There was no pressing need for it. The truly slick move was yet to come. Because when Luo Chong had first initiated these projects, he had set a fundamental principle for all large machinery: modular design. This led to a magical result. The tractor, the loader, the corn harvester, and the grain harvester, these big 4 hot off the Research Institute's assembly line, all used the same chassis, the same engine. Even the layout of the control levers in the cockpit was identical. Aside from the different heads attached to the front, the rest of them were practically stamped from the same mold. With their vast experience in producing tractors, building harvesters was now a walk in the park for the workers. They could assemble the parts with their eyes closed. Of course, there were 2 oddballs, the excavator and the road roller. For the excavator, Luo Chong wanted it to be able to handle more complex field operations, so he put it on a Caterpillar track chassis. He called it Technical Reserve. As for what he was reserving this technology for, tanks. Shoving a steam engine into a tank seemed unreliable no matter how he thought about it, but developing the technology first was never a bad idea. Centuries later, when his descendants needed it, they could flip through their ancestors' notebook and exclaim, "Whoa, so this kind of black technology existed," and put it straight to use. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Currently, the excavator prototype was complete. But a while back, Luo Chong had a flash of inspiration and proposed a new idea. Replace the digging bucket with a giant pneumatic hammer, specifically for quarrying mountains and boring train tunnels. And so, the Research Institute was now hard at work developing a supergiant hammer. As for the road roller, that seemingly clumsy, brutish machine, its chassis was already finished. He heard they were now using an oversized steam-powered plate rolling machine to fabricate its 2 massive, cylindrical steel wheels. Luo Chong wasn't worried. With ample manpower, overcoming these technical hurdles was only a matter of time. And amidst this scene of thriving progress, a technology that could once again change the world was born in silence. The chemistry team of the Integrated Research Institute, in collaboration with the steel mill, had successfully smelted an alloy of ultra-high hardness and extreme heat resistance, molybdenum steel. What did the emergence of this material mean? It meant the Han tribe could now build higher precision machine tools, more durable cutting tools, and deadlier firearms. Luo Chong could say with confidence that with molybdenum steel, he could replicate nearly any automatic firearm from memory. Rat-a-tat-tat-tat. The roar of a machine gun already seemed to echo in his ears. An irrepressible thought surfaced. This ultimate weapon of destruction, should he, or shouldn't he, unleash it? He looked down at the technical drawings in his hand. On them were depicted 2 completely different maritime weapons. One was a naval gun. The other was a torpedo. A torpedo, to put it bluntly, wasn't at the apex of technology. Aside from a few precision components, it was just a layer of iron skin wrapped around a pile of explosives, basically a swimming gas canister. But a naval gun? That was on an entirely different level of difficulty. An 8-meter-long cannon barrel required a gigantic lathe and boring machine over 10 meters long to process it. Such an industrial behemoth, even in the 21st century, could only be built by a handful of countries worldwide. One was in the heavens, the other on Earth. But a naval gun could bombard land from over 10 kilometers away. Could a torpedo climb ashore? Luo Chong's finger traced a slow path across the drawing. He listed the technical specifications on the paper. These were all directions for the future, not for the present. You had to eat your meal 1 bite at a time and walk your path 1 step at a time. Take too big a step, and you're liable to pull something. Voiceover. Luo Chong's approach to technological development was chaotically brilliant. 1 minute he's figuring out how to farm. The next, a blue flaming Gatling gun. is already on the drawing board. From agricultural machinery to superalloys, his technological leaps were wider than the Great Wall. You could only say that knowledge is power, but too much knowledge can also lead to decision paralysis. After all, when you have the option to skip to the endgame, it's hard not to press that big red World Peace button. Luo Chong stared at the molybdenum steel alloy research report in his hand, a tantalizing itch in his heart. Rat-a-tat-tat-tat. The phantom of a Gatling gun seemed to spin and dance before his very eyes. But he quickly calmed himself, shoving the insane blueprint of the new warship deeper into the recesses of his cabinet. Impulse was the devil. Diving into all that right now was pure indulgence. First, the newly designated molybdenum mining area in Chungkong Prefecture was still a barren wasteland. Not even a single work shed had been erected. What was he going to use to make steel? Second, the tech specialists at the Research Institute were currently throwing every ounce of their being into the excavator and road roller, practically tearing their hair out. Was he trying to kill them by adding a Starship project to their workload? Finally, and most crucially, the entire tribe was engaged in a frenzy of infrastructure construction and grain stockpiling under the guidance of the 5-year plan. If he suddenly jumped up and declared he wanted to build cannons, who were they going to shoot? You couldn't exactly plow fields with a warship, could you? Therefore, Luo Chong decisively suppressed the military-industrialist burning within him. In his reply to the Research Institute, he first lavished them with praise, then casually instructed, "Excellent work, comrades. For now, use this new material to make a few lathe cutting tools and forge a few pneumatic hammerheads. See how durable they are and test their performance. As for that new model of Coast Guard vessel that would make pirates wet their pants in fear," click. He locked the cabinet door. Out of sight, out of mind. For the next few years, the main theme for the Han tribe was stockpile grain. Build infrastructure. The plan was set, and no one was to alter it recklessly. Just as Luo Chong was setting the tone for future development, a letter from the capital's sewer engineering team made his eyes light up. The team had encountered a problem while digging tunnels. How could they ensure the passages they were excavating underground were perfectly straight? A group of master craftsmen had gathered, scratching their heads, but couldn't come up with a good idea. Just then, a young carpenter, a man of culture with a few years of schooling, slapped his forehead and sketched a rough diagram on a piece of paper. "Look," he said, pointing at the drawing and explaining with wild gestures. "We can use a bamboo tube, open at both ends, and lower it down from the vertical shaft. At the top end, we'll put a carbide lamp, like a flashlight. The light will shoot right down, swoosh. Then, at the bottom of the bamboo tube, we'll place a glass mirror at an angle to reflect the light forward. This way, as long as our workers in the tunnel follow that spot of light, and the lamp doesn't move, the direction will be absolutely straight." The others crowded around to look, clicking their tongues in amazement. "Hey, kid, how does your brain work?" Luo Chong, ever the modern man, looked at the sketch with a slight smile playing on his lips. Wasn't this just a crude version of a periscope? That fellow Ao Fei in the optics team had long since mastered all sorts of tricks with mirror reflection. An older master craftsman, however, frowned and started calculating the cost. "Your method is good, but with a carbide lamp and a glass mirror, how much will one of these cost? We need one for every vertical shaft. What's the total?" Ahem. The head of the engineering team, Yu Ji, coughed twice and made the final decision. "As long as it works. Money is the chief's problem. Besides, it's underground. Even if we don't use this thing for direction, we still need lighting, right? I say we need at least 2 lamps per shaft." His words made sense, and everyone nodded in agreement. And so, this request, with the attached periscope design, was delivered to Luo Chong's desk. Luo Chong couldn't help but laugh after reading it. An educated carpenter really was different. He knew how to learn and apply knowledge flexibly. But after a moment's thought, he picked up his pen and rejected the proposal. The method was good, but it was too wasteful. This device was a one-time use tool. After the sewer was dug, it would be discarded. Spending a fortune to build a pile of disposable items? That was no way to manage precious resources. Luo Chong took the original plan and, with a few strokes of his brush, drew a more cost-effective, light version. Why use bamboo tubes and mirrors? Just nail a frame together with 4 wooden strips. Build a scaffold over the shaft opening to hold the frame in place. When you need to set the position, just light a lamp at the bottom end of the frame inside the tunnel and use a shutter to let a beam of light escape. Won't that work? This improved version, aside from a few scraps of wood, had almost zero cost. The lamps were needed anyway, so that wasn't an extra expense. When they were done, the wooden frames could be chopped up for firewood. 2 birds with 1 stone, and cheap. When Luo Chong's approval and his money-saving guide were sent back, Yu Ji and the team of craftsmen had a sudden realization. That's right. The chief is so much more thoughtful. We were only thinking about whether it would work. We forgot this thing is a consumable. The chief's method is brilliant. And cheap. It's a win. In the second year of the Daming era, the spring of the Han tribe slipped away amidst the clamor of construction. As the weather warmed, the Research Institute in Xinfeng Prefecture delivered a series of brilliant results on schedule. In February, 6 brand-new corn harvesters rolled off the assembly line, more than enough to handle the upcoming harvest. Immediately after, the production lines for tractors and loaders went into full swing. 10 tractors, 30 excavators, and 30 loaders. This order for 70 steel behemoths was enough to keep the Xinfeng Prefecture machinery factory busy for a good half a year. Luo Chong wasn't in a hurry. These machines were like heavy equipment that had to be prioritized for the main forces, key projects like the Cross-Sea Bridge and the construction of the capital. Time flew, and mid-April soon gave way to summer. The crops in the fields gradually took on a golden hue. Another bountiful harvest season was fast approaching. Luo Chong felt a particular surge of interest. He packed up his family and set off in a grand procession for the mechanized farming test fields in Luoyang Prefecture. The official reason was a vacation, but in reality, are you kidding? This was the first time in the history of the Han tribe that grain was being harvested by machine. If he, the chief, wasn't there to witness such a historic moment in person, how would the history books be able to brag about it later? Voiceover. From the grand blueprint of a starship to a money-saving trick for sewer alignment, Luo Chong perfectly embodied the art of a chief's self-cultivation. Gaze at the stars, but also keep your feet firmly on the ground. After all, no matter how advanced the technology, it must first serve the core KPI of feeding everyone. As for the Gatling gun, no rush. Once there's more grain than they can eat, it can be brought out as an after-dinner dessert. This time, aside from inspecting the mechanized harvest, Luo Chong had another crucial item on his agenda for his trip to Luoyang Prefecture. Reports from his subordinates indicated that at the breeding farm near the test fields, the first batch of eunuch pigs were fattening up nicely and would soon be ready for slaughter. This was a paramount issue, one that concerned whether the people of the Han tribe could achieve pork freedom in the future. He had to see it with his own eyes. The history of livestock breeding in the Han tribe was nothing short of a magnificent crossbred romance. In the beginning, the tribe had only 2 types of cattle. One was the native forest cattle, large and powerful, but with a wild temperament. The other was the prairie cattle obtained from the grasslands, which had good stamina and a gentle nature, but were on the small side. On the principle of complementary strengths for a harmonious union, the experts at the Ministry of Agriculture put their heads together and decided to simply arrange a marriage between the two. And so, a hybrid breed that combined the best of both worlds was born. Normally, the story would have ended there, a happily ever after. But as fate would have it, the gears of destiny gave another turn. Remember the Prairie Wolf tribe? The ones who had once clashed with the Han tribe and later followed Modern? Well, that clan was wiped out by the Han tribe in a border skirmish. And their tribe's most valuable asset, a peculiar species known as Highland cattle, naturally became spoils of war. This Highland cattle was a peculiar beast, with a style all its own. It was of medium build, with a pair of thick, curved horns on its head that grew backwards and upwards. They looked intimidating but weren't particularly sharp. Its coat was a grayish blue, the color of rock, which also earned it the names Great Blue Ox and Rock Ox. Its most conspicuous feature was its high, prominent shoulders, which made it look like a hunchbacked old man. An uninformed observer might have thought a dromedary camel had wandered in. But don't you dare underestimate this hunchbacked old man. Its list of merits could fill an entire page. It was hardy, supremely hardy. Shrubs and leaves were mere appetizers. It could even chew on thorny brambles with relish. It ate whatever it was given, wasn't a picky eater in the slightest, and was ridiculously easy to raise. It was strong, had astonishing stamina, and was particularly adept at climbing slopes. You could say that the Prairie Wolf tribe's dominance in their remote highland corner was entirely thanks to the support of these bovine brethren. Luo Chong would beat his chest and declare that in terms of draft performance, this highland cattle could pin every other breed of cattle in the world to the ground and wipe the floor with them. Even the Han tribe's own painstakingly cultivated hybrid had to bow down and sing surrender in its presence. With such a superior breed, Luo Chong's first reaction was, of course, propagate, promote, let the entire Han tribe use them. But to his surprise, these highland handsome boys actually had trouble acclimating when they were brought to the plains. No matter how carefully the keepers looked after them, a large number of them still fell ill and died for all sorts of bizarre reasons. Fine. To preserve this excellent bloodline, there was only one path left, more crossbreeding. And so, a more complex love polygon began, using the highland cattle as the sire and the Han tribe's own hybrid cattle as the dam, then crossbreeding the highland cattle with the prairie cattle, and then breeding their offspring with the original hybrid. After 3 long years of a breeding program as complex as a primetime soap opera, finally, the ultimate hybrid bull demon king, a creature with 1/2 highland, 1/3 prairie, and 1/6 forest cattle blood, was born. This thing was a perfect monster. With shoulders standing 1.8 meters high, a hunched back, a bluish-black or dark brown coat, and sharp horns, it fulfilled every fantasy the Han tribe had for a draft animal. It had explosive power, freakish stamina, ate anything, wasn't picky, and had a temperament as gentle as a golden retriever, nuzzling up to anyone it saw. Most importantly, it was adaptable to all terrains and all climates. Whether in the icy north or the humid wetlands of the southern islands, it thrived without ever getting sick. It was as if the words hardy and industrious were etched into its very DNA. Of course, this bull demon king had one small problem. The breeding period had been too short, and the bloodline wasn't yet stable. Any day now, it might throw back to an ancestor and produce a calf that looked like its grandfather's generation. This was something that couldn't be rushed. It could only be stabilized with time. Now, the Ministry of Agriculture had a new task: to breed cattle specifically for meat. The goal was much clearer: high meat yield, fast growth, and easy to raise. There was no question that the massive forest cattle had to be the main stock. The experts at the ministry already had a plan: use the highest quality, pure-blooded forest bulls as sires, and select a batch of hybrid offspring from highland and prairie cattle to be the dams. The resulting calves would guarantee both size and meat quality. They would also inherit a docile temperament, their growth unhindered by the smaller prairie cattle genes. Currently, the first round of mating has been completed at the breeding farm, the person in charge reported. The sires are 2 purebred forest bulls, and the dams are 80 highland prairie hybrid cows. 67 have been confirmed pregnant. Luo Chong was taken aback. 80 cows and only 2 bulls. Is that enough? He silently grumbled to himself. 1 bull for 40 wives? Can his back handle it? Should I get them some kidney soup to replenish his strength? A nearby herdsman who had been transferred from the pastoral regions overheard this, chuckled, and chimed in. Chief, you may not know this, but during their heat, these bulls and horses can go at it several times a day. To ensure quality, though, we usually limit them to twice. Oh, Luo Chong clicked his tongue in wonder. Truly, a bull demon king. He then asked curiously, so how do you know which cows are pregnant? The young herdsman's face instantly beamed with pride as he began to impart his ancestral wisdom. That's easy. Look at the eyes. A pregnant cow will have purplish-red blood vessels bulging on the whites of her eyes. Look at her appetite. A pregnant one eats more and grows faster. Then look at her rear. A pregnant cow often has manure clinging to its hindquarters. He paused, then summarized. But none of those are the most accurate. The most accurate method is still to use your hands. Use your hands. Luo Chong was even more astonished. You feel it through the belly. Well, the young man scratched his head, a little embarrassed. With an encouraging look from the manager, he finally said in a low voice, Chief, we usually reach in through the rear and directly feel the womb inside her belly. In through the rear? Luo Chong was petrified on the spot, his jaw nearly hitting the floor. The young man nodded honestly and added with a serious expression, That's right. You check Mares the same way. Luo Chong. Good heavens. That was truly a unique skill. In an era without ultrasound machines, mastering such a barehanded pregnancy test technique made one a top-tier talent. Luo Chong couldn't help but look at the young man in a new light. He clapped him heavily on the shoulder. Young man, keep up the good work. I have high hopes for you. Afterward, the group went to the pigsty. It turned out that scientific pig farming was the way to go. In 2 adjacent pens, one side held the intact boars who hadn't met the knife, while the other held those who had already become eunuchs. They were born on the same day and received the same feed. The result was obvious. The eunuch pigs were a full size bigger than their intact neighbors. Voiceover. From the birth of the bull demon king, to the shocking skill of the barehanded pregnancy test, to the fattening secrets of the eunuch pig, the Han tribe's animal husbandry was a wild combination of unorthodox methods and black box technology. Luo Chong proved with facts that as long as you keep an open mind, there are always more solutions than problems. Never mind how visceral the process is, as long as it gets meat on everyone's table in the end, it's a good method. As they say, comparison can be a cruel thing. When Luo Chong saw the clear size difference between the two pins of piglets, he knew the eunuch pig project was a resounding success. Not bad at all. Luo Chong nodded in satisfaction, then turned to the head of the breeding farm. Have you all mastered this castration technique? Going forward, train more people and send them to the animal husbandry bureaus in every region. You can offer it as a paid service to the common folk. It's a way to both promote the technology and generate revenue. Hearing this, the manager's face fell. Chief, we've learned the technique, but we have no opportunity to practice. One slip of the knife, and we could maim a perfectly good piglet. The loss would be significant. Luo Chong was left speechless. He mulled it over. Perhaps he should just open a veterinary branch under the medical college. He could systematize all these unique skills, like the barehanded pregnancy test and precision castration, into a proper curriculum. After touring the breeding farm, Luo Chong felt much more at ease. It seemed even the heavens were on his side. After several gloomy days, a summer rain finally fell. On the third day after the rain, the sun hung scorching in the sky, evaporating the last traces of moisture from the cornfields. The ground became firm, and the steel behemoths, which had long been champing at the bit, could finally take the field. Rumble, before the sky was even light, the roar of engines already filled the farm base. 6 brand-new corn harvesters, like a line of steel beasts ready for battle, led the procession with an imposing air. Following behind were 21 tractors, pulling massive carts like a troop of loyal little brothers. Luo Chong, accompanied by a contingent of his personal guard, rode on a tall horse, escorting them. The accompanying guards also carried 2 cameras, ready to document this historic moment. Before long, the governors of the surrounding prefectures, Xian, Lu Guangzhou, Yunji, and Yangyan, all caught wind of the event and came rushing over. They looked like a gaggle of curious children, ready to witness this unprecedented grand show of mechanized harvesting. A technical support team from Xinfeng Prefecture was also in place. This group of specialists was responsible for escorting and protecting these magnificent machines. At 7 in the morning, all was ready. The governors gathered around Luo Chong, their hearts pounding as they stared in awe at the row of menacing harvesters. My heavens! So this is a corn harvester? That big comb on the front is just immense. Chief, when do we begin? The convoy leader ran over to ask for instructions. Begin. Proceed with the plan and split up. Luo Chong waved his hand. Yes, sir. With the order given, the 6 harvesters charged into the golden cornfield like tigers descending a mountain. Were. In the harvester closest to Luo Chong, the driver held the steering lever in one hand and controlled the speed with the other. The iron comb at the front of the vehicle precisely aligned with a row of corn stalks, and then it bulldozed through. Crunch, crunch, crunch. The iron comb snagged the stalks, and rotating blades swiftly cut them at the base, pulling them into the machine's belly. The man-high corn stalks were devoured at a speed visible to the naked eye. When the machine reached the part of the stalk with the cobs, the golden ears were firmly caught by an iron grate. Pop, pop. With a sharp tug, the cobs were separated from the stalks. The stalks were drawn deeper into the machine, while the cobs were sent onto a conveyor belt and into the husking rollers behind. Shhhh. The teeth on the rollers spun rapidly, stripping the cobs bare in a flash, revealing the glittering, golden kernels within. Finally, the naked corn cobs were ejected from a side chute, flying in golden parabolas and landing precisely in the grain hopper of the cart beside it. The entire process was smooth as silk, dizzyingly fast. Wherever the harvester passed, the lush cornfield was instantly felled, leaving behind a thick carpet of stalks flattened into the shape of instant noodles. These stalks were treasures. Once dried, they could be used as fodder or firewood. Not a bit was wasted. The governors followed behind on their horses, watching in stunned silence, overcome with emotion. I remember, this corn was acquired from the Heyuan tribe by Yufu back in the day, wasn't it? It's only been a few years, and we're already harvesting it with machines. Heyuan, an old-timer, sighed reflectively. It's true. To think we were still living like savages back then. And now? TSK, this life feels like a dream. Lu Guangzhou echoed. In the winters of the past, my clansmen could only survive by eating water chestnuts. Now, we never have to worry about going hungry again. Yunji was even more moved, recalling the tribe's bitter past. Luo Chong listened to their reflections and smiled. Everyone will have to work even harder in the future to make the lives of our people ever better. At noon, The first batch of freshly harvested corn was transported back to the base. Luo Chong had a large pot cooked and invited the governors to join him in gnawing on the cobs in the courtyard. Crunch. With one bite, the sweetness exploded in their mouths, a taste of pure, simple joy. Chewing on the sweet corn, Yunji couldn't help but ask, "Chief, this machine harvesting is so efficient. In the future, should we promote it in all our regions?" As soon as he said this, the eyes of the other governors lit up. Mechanized farms. That was a tangible political achievement. Who wouldn't want one? Luo Chong chewed on his corn, falling into deep thought. He had originally established this farm to provide logistical support for the northern expedition. But now, the situation was different. The captives had all been transported south, and the pressure on the northern food supply had eased considerably. So, what was to become of this now mature system of mechanized agriculture? Voiceover. From the scientific breeding of eunuch pigs to the shocking spectacle of the steel behemoth autumn harvest, the Han tribe style was hardcore through and through. While others were still shucking corn by hand, Luo Chong was already playing Snake with a combined harvester. This wasn't just being a version ahead. This was a direct leap from the Stone Age to the Steampunk era. How were the other tribes supposed to compete? Gnawing on a sweet, sticky corn cob, Luo Chong's mind was racing. Yunji's question had hit upon the very issue he'd been mulling over. Originally, this mechanized farm was intended to be the quartermaster for the northern expedition. But now, the Northern War was proceeding smoothly. More than 30,000 captives had been deported south, transforming into a labor force across the various regions. The 10,000-plus adolescents were clearing their own land and planting their own crops, having already achieved food independence. The female captives, clacking away at their sewing machines in the clothing factories, were earning enough work points to trade for their own meals. And the able-bodied male captives? Mines, construction sites. They were moved wherever they were needed. Freeloading was not an option. By this calculation, the pressure on the northern food supply had plummeted. This 20,000-mu mechanized farm had instantly transformed from a strategic grain reserve into a strategic surplus grain reserve. With the burden lightened, a new problem arose. If they were to promote this kind of farm in other regions, wouldn't the Han tribe's grain production skyrocket? Having more grain was, of course, a wonderful thing. But having so much you couldn't eat it all became a sweet annoyance. He couldn't just watch the grain rot in the warehouses, could he? Sell it to the pastoralists on the grasslands? Wouldn't that be aiding the enemy? When their population boomed and they came looking for trouble again, wouldn't he have shot himself in the foot? In an instant, a dozen clever schemes for consuming the grain surplus flashed through Luo Chong's mind. Too much staple grain, then adjust the planting structure. Plant more corn. If people can't eat it all, feed it to the pigs. More pigs meant more meat. More meat meant healthier citizens. Plant more sorghum. Use it to make liquor. Whether it was high-proof spirits for trade or life-saving medicinal alcohol, it was all hard currency. Speaking of liquor, Luo Chong's eyes lit up. Beer. That's right. How could he have forgotten about that? Brew beer with barley. If he could pull this off, it would absolutely outsell spirits. Then, to guarantee the beer supply, they would have to plant even more barley. And the barley straw could be used to feed cattle and sheep. Wouldn't that be another boost to meat production? Besides brewing, staple grains could be processed in a variety of new ways. Mill wheat into flour and make dried noodles, even instant noodles. For a bit of luxury, make cookies and sakama to sell as snacks. Rice could be made into popcorn and puffed rice candy. Thinking about it this way, having too much grain wasn't a problem at all. The more grain, the more developed the tribe's food industry would become. It was a perfect virtuous cycle. At this thought, Luo Chong took a final, clean bite of his corn cob. Crunch. His mind was made up. Do it. Promote it. We must promote it. Luo Chong wiped his mouth and said to the governors who were watching him with expectant eyes, I was always worried about having more grain than we could eat, but I've figured it out now. If we can't eat it, we'll use it to make liquor. Not just sorghum liquor, but fruit wine and beer, too. We'll get them all up and running. From now on, salt, iron, and liquor, these three must all be state monopolized. They are the future pillars of our tribe's finances. Yunji was stunned. So, Chief, you mean that in the future, our farms will focus on planting sorghum and wheat? Corn too. Luo Chong waved his hand. If people can't finish it, feed it to the pigs. As for rice, the state farms won't plant it for now. First, the technology isn't mature, and second, the staple grains should still be grown by the people themselves. We, the state, will focus on side businesses. Lu Guangzhu quickly asked. So, should we set up farms just like this one? Exactly. Luo Chong slapped his thigh. We'll build large, comprehensive farms. Integrated planting and breeding. self-produced and self-consumed fertilizer, self-sufficient feed. And we'll plan a food industrial park right next door, a one-stop service. He paused, then added a word of caution. But let me be clear. Anyone who wants to set up a farm must first go back, find a suitable location, and submit a written application. I will send a special commissioner to conduct a site inspection. Only after it's approved will you be allocated machines and personnel. Don't complain that it's troublesome. This is also to prevent you from messing things up. Some places just aren't suitable for farms. Besides, even if you submitted your reports right now, I don't have any spare machines for you. Xinfeng Prefecture's production schedule is packed for the first half of the year, all with construction machinery. The earliest you could get anything would be the second half of the year. So, what you need to do now is go back and get the preliminary preparations done. Next spring, whoever is best prepared gets to build their farm first. Hearing this, the governors understood perfectly. The message was clear. If they didn't go back and start preparing now, they'd miss the boat entirely. One by one, they bid farewell to Luo Chong and rushed back, their hearts ablaze. Luo Chong, however, was in no hurry. He and his family stayed at the farm for a few more leisurely days. Only after all the corn in the fields had been harvested did he issue a new order. On the vacant land of the farm, plant potatoes on a large scale. The few thousand caddies of seed potatoes that had been cultivated in the greenhouse, plus the half he had authoritatively confiscated from Yufu, totaled over 10,000 caddies. This time, they planted a full 25 mu. Come autumn, it would be another bumper harvest. After settling the farm's affairs, Luo Chong returned home with his family, content. As soon as he got back, he grabbed Zhanning and plunged headfirst into the great cause of new food product development. Beer, instant noodles, popcorn. Zhanning was the first to conquer cookies. She built an oven in the courtyard, and the small pastries she baked from batter were a huge hit with the children. Luo Chong, meanwhile, began to rack his brain, trying to recall the modern beer brewing process. The first, and most crucial step, was to find a magical plant called hops. Voiceover. Luo Chong demonstrated with his actions what "I have a bold idea" truly means. From the annoyance of a grain surplus to the grand strategy of state-monopolized salt, iron, and liquor, and then to the specific implementation of beer and instant noodles, his train of thought leaped faster than a rabbit. One can only say that the creativity of a foodie is limitless. For the sake of a pint of beer, he could single-handedly shove a primitive tribe onto the fast track to becoming a food industry empire. Brewing beer? Luo Chong scratched his head. As a mechanical engineer from the defense industry, he had to admit this was outside his field of expertise. But, as the saying goes, just because you haven't eaten pork doesn't mean you haven't seen a pig run. In the age of information he came from, tutorials for everything from homemade lipstick to homebrewed beer were just a quick search away. Luo Chong had picked up the gist of it through simple cultural osmosis. Why did he remember it so clearly? Not because he had a photographic memory, but because the process was just so ridiculously simple. Absurdly simple. Steep the malt, filter it, add hops and boil, cool it down, add yeast, and seal it for fermentation. That was it. Just a few simple steps. Compared to distilling spirits, with its process as complex as alchemy, brewing beer was child's play. With a clear plan in mind, Luo Chong immediately sprang into action. It was early summer, and the temperature, hovering in the 20s Celsius, was the golden hour for yeast to thrive. He had someone find him some high-quality barley malt and arrange for a few new wooden barrels and a large iron pot for boiling the wort to be made. As for the crucial hops and yeast, as luck would have it, he had them on hand. The hops were one of the medicinal herbs Tang Yao had brought from the Tang tribe, and they were currently flourishing in his backyard garden. The yeast was a staple in his kitchen, used for leavening bread. All he needed was to get started. Zhanning saw Luo Chong clattering around in the kitchen and thought he was whipping up some new dish. She came over, curious, but what she saw was a sack of malt and a few empty wooden barrels. "Husband, are you making maltose candy?" "Nope." Luo Chong shook his head, pouring the malt into a small stone mill. He smiled mysteriously. "I'm brewing a new kind of liquor. Barley wine. Something like that." Luo Chong pushed the stone mill, huffing and puffing as he began his work. Zhanning quickly stepped in to help, adding malt to the mill's feeder and asking, "Don't we already have rice wine and sorghum liquor? Why are you making barley wine now?" "The difference is huge," Luo Chong explained. "Sorghum liquor is too strong. It goes right to your head in the summer. And rice wine is more like a sweet rice porridge than a proper drink. I was thinking we could make a liquor that's not too high in alcohol, is refreshing and thirst-quenching, and perfect for chugging on a hot summer day." Zhanning thought it made sense. Working together, they quickly ground a large sack of malt. When it came to the saccharification step of steeping the malt, however, Luo Chong was stumped. He knew he had to steep it, but the ratio of water to malt, he'd forgotten. But it wasn't a major problem. He was rich. He could afford to be wasteful. Didn't know the ratio? Then experiment. Luo Chong pulled out 10 small wooden barrels and prepared 10 different batches, each with a different water-to-malt ratio. He took each one through the entire process: saccharification, filtering, boiling, cooling, and adding yeast. Finally, he had Zhang write 10 small notes and stick them on the barrels as labels. The whole process was so methodical, he almost convinced himself he knew what he was doing. With the beer sorted, Luo Chong turned his attention to another giant of the food industry, instant noodles. He remembered the manufacturing process for this one very clearly. Mix the dough, press it flat, cut the noodles, steam them, fry them, and then dry them. The core technology was deep frying, and the soul of deep frying was a magical vegetable oil, palm oil.